A field at the edge of morning. Mist still sitting low over the grass, the smell of dung and damp wool. An animal the size of a small car standing there, chewing, supremely indifferent. And underneath it, folded down into an awkward crouch, a human being. Not hunting it, not afraid of it. Just reaching up with both hands, taking hold of a part of this enormous creature and pulling, rhythmically, patiently, until warm liquid runs into a clay pot. Then this person lifts the pot and drinks the liquid that came out of the animal. Hold that image for a second because nobody alive treats it as strange anymore. You poured a version of it on cereal this week. It sits in your fridge door next to the condiments, in a carton printed with a cheerful cartoon cow, and the only debate it inspires is the expiry date. We have made it so ordinary that the original act has gone invisible, so let's make it visible again. A member of one species walked up to a much larger member of a completely different species, decided the correct move was to squeeze it, and then swallowed what came out. As a plan, it has a certain confidence to it. And here's the part that makes it genuinely odd rather than just funny. For most of the time humans have existed, the person in that field drinking from that pot should have spent the rest of the day regretting it. Their gut was not built for this. Mild cramps to begin with, then the bloating, then the kind of afternoon best spent within sprinting distance of a bush. Not because the milk was spoiled, not because they did it wrong. Because the adult human body, as standard issue, treats a big drink of fresh milk as a mild act of self-sabotage. This isn't a quirk of a few unlucky people. It's the original setting for our entire species, and for nearly every other mammal too. The reason sits in a single enzyme with an unglamorous name, lactase. Milk's main sugar is lactose, and lactose is a molecule too big to cross from your gut into your blood as is. Lactase is the little chemical scissors that snips it into two smaller sugars your body can actually absorb. Newborn mammals are flush with it. They have to be, since for the first stretch of life, milk is the entire menu. A kitten, a piglet, a human infant, all running the lactase machinery at full tilt. Then weaning arrives, and the body does something that looks, from a human grocery store perspective, almost spiteful. It starts switching the lactase production down. The genetic dimmer switch turns, output drops, and by the time a young mammal is eating solid food, the factory is winding toward a skeleton crew. From the body's point of view, this is just good housekeeping. Why keep paying to manufacture milk scissors for an animal that, in the natural order of things, is never going to drink milk again? No adult lion is sidling up to its mother for a top-up. The supply ends at weaning, so the equipment for processing it gets mothballed. This is the ancestral state, documented across the human genetics literature in journals like Nature Reviews Genetics, and it has a deliberately boring technical label, lactase non-persistence. Translated into plain language, the off switch works exactly as designed, which sets up a quiet little trap in the story most of us carry in our heads. We tend to assume that because lots of people today drink milk perfectly happily, milk drinking and the ability to digest it must have arrived together, hand in hand, that somewhere back there, our ancestors evolved the right gut and then, sensibly, started using the animals around them to fill it. Ability first, habit second, the tidy version. The version where biology politely clears its throat and grants permission before the behavior begins. The trouble is that the dirt tells a different story. When you go digging, literally into the ground, into the broken pottery of the first farmers, the timeline you pull out does not line up the way the tidy version needs it to. Someone, somewhere, was filling pots with milk long before the human body had agreed to the arrangement. And the order in which those two things actually happened is where this whole story stops being a pleasant fact about cows and becomes one of the strangest things our species has ever done to itself. So let's go to the ground and read the timeline properly, because the dirt keeps better records than our intuitions do. Start with when. The habit of milking animals doesn't reach back into some misty, deep time past, alongside fire and stone tools. It's recent, almost embarrassingly recent on the scale of our species. It begins around 10,000 years ago, tangled up with one of the biggest turns in the human story, the Neolithic, the slow shift from chasing food across a landscape to keeping it penned in a yard. People stopped only hunting animals and started owning them. Goats, sheep, then cattle, domesticated, fenced, fed, bred. And once you have a live animal standing in your settlement producing milk on a daily schedule, somebody is eventually going to look at that and think the previously unthinkable thought. A renewable resource, on legs, refilling itself every morning. You don't have to kill it to get something out of it. You just have to be brave enough or hungry enough to reach underneath. Now, how do we actually know any of this happened 10,000 years ago rather than guessing from cave paintings and hoping? This is where one of those quietly brilliant pieces of science comes in. And it's worth telling as the small detective story it really is. The team is led by a chemist named Richard Evershed, the work published in Nature in 2008, and the trick at its heart is this: fat doesn't lie. When you put milk into an unglazed clay pot, microscopic traces of milk fat soak into the porous walls and get trapped there. Lock that pot in the ground for 10,000 years and those fat molecules just wait. Milk fat carries a particular chemical fingerprint. a specific signature in its carbon that distinguishes it from the fat of meat. So you take shards of ancient pottery from the early farming world, the Near East and Southeastern Europe, you grind a little of the wall to powder, you run it through the instruments, and the milk announces itself across 100 centuries of silence. No painting required, no hopeful interpretation of a scratched figure, chemistry soaked into a broken pot, testifying that yes, this vessel held milk and it held it that long ago. So far, so reasonable. Animals get domesticated, pots get filled, the cheerful, tidy version of the story is holding together nicely. People are drinking milk 10,000 years ago. Good for them. Here's the objection that ruins the evening, though, and it's the whole hinge of what follows. Remember the off switch. Remember that the standard issue adult human gut, then as now, was set to lactase non-persistence, built to make milk a bad idea after childhood. So picture these early farmers honestly. They are filling pots with milk, generation after generation, in a settlement full of adults whose own bodies are, by default, not equipped to digest the stuff without consequences. Milking the herd diligently every morning, while being, most of them, biologically the wrong customers for the product. You can feel the question forming, and it's the obvious one. If it was making them sick, why on earth keep doing it? Why build an entire way of life around a food your own intestines file a formal complaint about? The neat answer would be that they couldn't possibly have kept it up, that the gene to digest milk must have been there from the very start, quietly already common. Otherwise, the whole enterprise makes no sense. Ability first, then habit. That's the version that lets everyone sleep. It's the version that keeps cause and effect in the dignified order we expect from them. It is also, as far as the evidence can tell, wrong. And not wrong by a generation or two, wrong by a margin so wide it stops being a rounding error and becomes the actual story. Because when scientists finally went looking for the milk-digesting gene in the bones of these early dairying people, expecting to find it sitting there politely explaining everything, they ran into something that didn't fit at all. The dates refused to cooperate. The habit was there. The biology to justify it was not. Which leaves one genuinely uncomfortable possibility hanging in the air, that for thousands of years, an entire branch of humanity built its life around drinking something it could barely stomach, and the order of events we'd all assumed had it exactly backwards. So here is the gap, laid out flat, because everything else hangs off the size of it. When geneticists learned to read the milk-digesting gene directly out of ancient skeletons, not guess at it, but pull the actual DNA from the bone and check whether the relevant switch was flipped on or off, they could finally line up two timelines and see if they matched. Timeline 1. When were people drinking milk per the fat in the pots? Timeline 2. When did the gene that lets adults digest milk actually become common across the population? A large international effort published in Nature in 2022, again with Evershed among the names, did exactly this on a continental scale, sweeping across the bones and the pottery of prehistoric Europe. The two timelines did not match. They weren't even close. People were milking animals, processing the milk, building daily life around it, for thousands of years before the digest it gene climbed to any real frequency in the population. The habit ran out ahead of the biology by a margin you could measure in millennia. Not a lag of a few hundred years, where evolution is quietly catching up. A vast, gaping stretch in which Europe was full of people producing and consuming milk while remaining, the overwhelming majority of them, biologically, the wrong audience for it. The gene was loitering at the back, the behavior was already at full sprint. Which forces the question the tidy version can't survive. How? If milk made most of them ill, how did the practice not just survive, but spread, embed, become central for that long with the bodies stubbornly refusing to upgrade? The answer is that they were cleverer than their own intestines, and they solved the problem the way humans have always solved problems they don't yet have the biology for. They cheated, not with DNA, they had no way to touch that, but with technology, with a recipe. Here's the part of the chemistry that hands them the loophole. The thing wrecking their afternoons is lactose, the sugar. But milk isn't only sugar. It's also fat and protein, the calories that actually matter when you're cold and hungry. And it turns out you can separate the two. Leave milk to sour, and the microbes living in it begin eating the lactose for you, doing outside the body the job the gut won't do inside it. Strain it, ferment it, let it curdle and age, and the sugar that punishes you keeps dropping while the fat and protein stay. At one end of that process, you get yogurt. Push it further, and you get cheese. And a hard, aged cheese can carry almost none of the original sugar at all. The thing that hurt you has been quietly digested before it ever reaches your mouth. Sit with what that means in order. Long before a single human had the gene to handle milk, humans had the kitchen to handle it. They patched a flaw in their own hardware with a piece of culture. A method, passed parent to child, of turning a food their bodies rejected into a food their bodies could live on. A genetic bug worked around by a recipe. Evolution hadn't filed the paperwork yet, so they routed around evolution and got the calories anyway. Cheese, in this light, isn't a delicacy. It's one of the oldest pieces of survival technology we have. A prehistoric workaround for a problem the body wouldn't fix for another several thousand years. And it works so well that it deepens the mystery instead of closing it. Because if fermentation already let people get milk's calories without the gut punishment, if the cultural fix was sitting right there, cheap and effective and passed down through every generation, then the tidy story has a brand new hole in it. The recipe already solved the practical problem. People could have gone on making cheese and yogurt forever, comfortable, well-fed, and lactose intolerant to the last, with no pressing need for their biology to change at all. So why did it change? Why, after thousands of years of the cultural workaround doing its job perfectly well, did the gene for drinking raw milk straight from the animal suddenly catch fire and spread, not gently, but as one of the fastest, hardest pushes of natural selection in the recent history of our species? Something, at some point, made the difference between digesting milk and not digesting it a matter of who lived and who didn't. And it wasn't that milk was nice. It wasn't that milk was nice. Hold on to that, because it's the exact point where the obvious explanation dies. The obvious explanation is so comfortable you can almost hear it. Milk is nutritious, the gene let you drink more of it, more nutrition means stronger people win. Clean, intuitive, and the kind of thing everyone nods along to. The 2022 nature work took that comfortable story and pulled it apart, because the numbers refused to support it. If the advantage were simply milk is good food, then in places and times where people drank the most milk, the gene should have been under the hardest pressure to spread. It wasn't. The intensity of dairying alone doesn't track with where and when the gene took off. Plenty of nutrition, and the biology stays unbothered. The everyday milk is healthy answer, as a driver of this particular piece of evolution, simply doesn't carry the weight. So the researchers asked a sharper question. Not when was milk available, but when was being unable to digest milk actually dangerous? And those are not the same question at all. And here the picture flips into something far grimmer and far more convincing. Think about what lactose intolerance actually does to you in a crisis. On an ordinary day with a full belly, drinking milk you can't digest is a miserable inconvenience. Cramps, gas, a ruined afternoon, nothing worse. But strip away the ordinary day. Bring in famine. The crops have failed, the granary's empty, and the one food still standing in the yard is the herd, still producing milk. Now the milk isn't a treat. It's the only calories left. And the person who drinks it and gets violent diarrhea isn't merely uncomfortable. Diarrhea means fluid pouring out of a body that has nothing to spare, in a body already hollowed out by starvation. Add disease, dense settlements, contaminated water, the gut infections that ran constant through early farming life, and you stack dehydration on dehydration. In good times, the difference between digesting milk and not digesting it is an embarrassing afternoon. In the worst times, it's the difference between surviving the famine and not. That's the reframing, and it's worth saying plainly because it inverts the whole moral of the story. The gene didn't spread because milk was a pleasant bonus in calm centuries. It spread because, at the precise moments when populations were dying, when crops failed and sickness tore through and the herd was the last larder standing, the few who could drink milk straight without losing precious water out the wrong end simply outlived the ones who couldn't. It mattered most exactly when survival was thinnest. Not a gentle nutritional nudge over the long haul. A brutal filter that only switched on at the edge of death. And when it did, it sorted the living from the dead with terrible efficiency. And here's the detail that lifts this from a regional accident to something profound about how we work. This didn't happen once. The same solution evolved independently in several different dairying populations, Northern and Central Europe, East and West Africa, the herders of Arabia, each landing on the same answer separately. Tishkov's team, in Nature Genetics in 2007, found it written into East African herders through a different mutation than the European one. Different genetic typo, same outcome. Keep the milk scissors running into adulthood. When evolution stumbles onto the identical fix by separate routes in separate places, that's biology shouting that the pressure was real and the same everywhere. Wherever humans leaned hard on animals to survive, the same harsh sorting played out. It's a textbook case of fast, recent human evolution, and of gene and culture dragging each other forward. The habit created the pressure rewrote the gene deepened the habit. Which is the strangest thing about that carton in your fridge. It isn't just food. It's the visible end of an old argument between a habit and a body. A habit the body never approved of, forced through anyway, until the body had no choice but to change. And the most remarkable part is that you don't need a laboratory to see who won that argument. The winners and losers are still here, walking around, sorted onto a map you can read in Living People Today, and where you personally fall on it was decided long before you were born by whether your ancestors survived a hunger you'll never have to feel. So let's read that map, because it's printed in living bodies right now, including yours. Start in the northwest corner of Europe, and the ability to drink milk straight is almost the rule. In places like Ireland and Scandinavia, the overwhelming majority of adults carry the switched-on gene and never think twice about a glass of milk. Then begin moving, south across Europe, east across Asia, and the trait thins out under your feet like a tide going out. By By the time you reach the far side of the Indian subcontinent, it has all but vanished. Across most of East Asia, an adult who downs a tall glass of fresh milk is signing up for exactly the afternoon their ancestors would have recognized. The same drink, the same species, opposite verdicts from the gut, and the line between them traces with eerie precision the old geography of who herded and who didn't. A living map of a prehistoric habit drawn in DNA, still legible thousands of years later. And it puts a quiet correction on how most of the milk-drinking world thinks about all this. We tend to treat lactose intolerance as a condition, a small malfunction, something gone slightly wrong with a person. Flip the map and you see it the other way around. Across the species as a whole, most adults on Earth are lactose intolerant. That isn't the broken version of a human. That's the original, the factory setting, the deep default running back through nearly every adult mammal that ever lived. The people who can drink raw milk into old age are the genuine oddities, the lineages carrying an accident. If anyone here is the mutant, statistically, it's the milk drinker. Which brings the whole thing back to where it started, to that figure crouched in the cold field and to your fridge door. For almost the entire human story, drinking milk as an adult was a mistake the body punished. Like nearly every mammal, the ancestral human shut off the milk-digesting enzyme after weaning, and that was that. Then humans started milking animals thousands of years before most of them could digest what they collected, and the gene that finally let them do it didn't spread because milk was pleasant. It spread because, in the right collision of famine and disease, the few who could drink milk without it killing them simply outlived the ones who couldn't. The carton in your fridge is the visible tip of one of the fastest pieces of natural selection our species has ever run. Biology dragged, against its own better judgment, into catching up with a habit it never approved of. So the next time you pour it without a flicker of thought, onto cereal, into coffee, straight from the carton at midnight with the fridge light on your face, understand what that unremarkable act actually is. It is the closing line of a very old and very harsh story. Somewhere far back in your line, in a winter when the crops had failed and the granary was bare and the herd was the last food left standing, someone drank from that herd and kept the water in their body when others couldn't, and lived and had children when the people who couldn't drink it did not. You exist holding that glass because of them. The fact that you can swallow it without a second thought, no cramp, no fear, no consequence, is the quiet, unearned ending of a struggle that cost a great many of your ancestors everything. They survived the milk so that for you, it could finally become boring. If this is the kind of thing that makes you look at your own kitchen a little differently, the deep history hiding inside the most ordinary objects you own, that's the whole reason this channel exists. So here's a question to take with you. Do you drink milk without a thought, or is it the thing you've learned to avoid? Whichever it is, your gut is quietly telling you which side of that ancient map your ancestors came down on. Tell me in the comments, and if you'd rather keep finding the strangeness folded inside the everyday, stay subscribed. There's always another ordinary thing with a wild story underneath it.